staff, our very able staff that will be assisting us today is Jane Denise, who's our committee clerk, who's off to my right, and our committee analyst is Dr. Phil McCarthy. So with all of the housekeeping done, we will open up LD 1080, an act to prevent economic hardship in Maine School Administrative District 44. The representative head is the bill sponsor. Welcome.
It's tricky there. Hello. Hey.
Good morning,
Good morning.
Senator Langley and Representative Cornfield, and esteemed members of the Joint Standing Committee on Education and Cultural Affairs. I'm Fran Head from Bethel. I represent District 117, which consists of 23 towns and townships in western Maine. LD 1080 offers a lasting and equitable solution to what I believe is the single most important issue facing quality education for 700 students in SAD 44. A district which has served Bethel, Greenwood, Woodstock, and Newry since 1965. Several residents of Newry are using the withdrawal process in order to secure tax break without regard to the financial impact on thousands of constituents who cannot afford 60% increase in property taxes for educational costs. Through a loophole, the current status of Newry Withdrawal Committee is offering a withdrawal in name only because they propose to create a Newry School Administrative Unit, which would then tuition the students back to SAD 44. If the tax burden shifts so heavily in the direction of working families and senior citizens, I have no confidence that the school budget would ever be approved by the remaining voters. As illustrated in the attached economic impact projection, owners of homes valued at $200,000 would be asked to pay $750 more annually, essentially subsidizing Newry's constitutional obligation to provide public education. Newry is home to Sunday River Ski Resort, one of the main drivers in our tourism-based economics. It takes a workforce from the entire region to keep Sunday River operational, and I believe the children of these employees and all the children of the district deserve the best possible education we can provide them, nothing less. The goal of this legislation is to stabilize the district's finance, eliminating tremendous uncertainty among residents, and to finally refocus our collective effort to student achievement and opportunities. I have several constituents here who can speak on the academic programs threatened by this withdrawal. The good faith negotiations of the school board and the EPS exemption SAD 44 shares with SAD 6. Given the unsustainable tax shift with withdrawal could improve upon the rest of the district. The greater public interest requires the town of Newry to continue to pay the proportional share of its value to SAD 44. Our existing arrangements ask the property owners of the district to pay identical mill rates for education. You can look over the state for a better way. It doesn't get any fairer than this one. LD 1080 seeks to avoid the immediate tax increase among some of the Western's Maine most vulnerable citizens. I know these people. They're already struggling to heat their homes in the winter and purchase prescriptions for medication and to find work. If the withdrawal agreement is placed before the voters of Newry, the other 4,500 SAD 44 residents are denied the ability to vote on an agreement impacting the quality of every student in the district and their education, as well as their tax bill. Neighborhood disagreements within one town, Newry, shouldn't have the ability to jeopardize the academic and extracurricular programs of hundreds of students or impact the massive tax increase of thousands of residents. For this reason and many others, the far-reaching consequences of Newry's withdrawal must be avoided, and LD 1080 accomplishes just that. Thank you for your thoughtful consideration of this proposal. I look forward to taking the recommendation of this committee under advisement as we move forward in the district. And in your packet, I've included there's a calculation of what the increase for each one of the, starting with the $50,000, that would be $187.50 for anyone that's property value is $50,000. For 175, it goes up to $656 additional. That's on top of what they're already paying. Then if you go to 275, it's $1,031. Not many people can take that and just go with that and be able to pay their taxes, and that's a severe problem. And it's a problem for our kids and the elderly people in our communities. Then there's a municipal rate, and if you see each one of them, tells you what the rate is for Greenwood, Bethel, Woodstock, and Newry. And it would tell you that, the graph tells you by color which ones are which. And this is a nice little map of all the towns that we service. In red, you'll see the ones that belong to the district. Some of them, like Gilead, is contracted with SAD 44. The others just send their tuition, their students to us. It does impact many, many, 700 students would be impacted. And that's a fear that many, many people have, that we won't be able to sustain that and provide the education these students want, or take care of the elderly that are on a fixed income. Thank you very much for listening to me. I appreciate your attention.
Thank you, Representative Head. Don't go anywhere yet. That's how the process works. I'll be checking to see if there's
Yes, I
any
should know that.
questions from the committee. Any questions, Representative Farnsworth?
As I recall, we've sort of had some of these discussions before.
Yes.
And as I recall, that the history is that there's been a lack of negotiation in the process. Is that correct?
I don't think there's been a lack of negotiation. I think there's been a lack of an agreement and coming together with what was acceptable.
Okay.
That's what I believe. I believe our school board did try very hard to come to an agreement that everybody was happy with, and that just did not happen. Not because they didn't try.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Head, would you support a process that would keep the legislature, sort of out of these, where we find ourselves today in between two towns, and we could come up with a process that could handle us outside of here?
Would I support that?
Yeah.
I'd support an agreement that didn't have people threatened with withdrawal every 2 years, because that's what's been happening. And it lays down and it rears its ugly head again, and we just find ourselves in a position of not coming to an agreement that's solid. And could I support something along that line? It would depend on the agreement. It truly would, only because the students need to know that their school is going to be there for them. I spoke with a high school student, and she was a sophomore, and she said to me, I hope that we can work together, so that I know where I'm going to graduate from. She was from Newry.
Representative Portfield.
Why do you think the town have not been able to come to an agreement?
I think it may partially be because of the carve-out, which with us in SAD 6. We're special. were special, and that was an allowance that was given to us some time ago. I believe it was 2005 it was agreed to. And it's because of the economic impact on recreation. And that I'm not sure why we can't come to an agreement, but what I'm sure is we haven't. We haven't come to an agreement. And again, I believe our school board did try.
Could you explain the special quality of the agreement, what the carve-out?
You know what, there are other constituents here that have
Okay.
more knowledge about that than I do, about the original agreement. I know about it, but I'm not well-spoken about it, and I'll tell you right up front, I'm not well-spoken about the agreement. I've read over it, but they can speak much better than I.
Fine.
President Sampson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here. And Gould and Bethel, that's
Yes.
a warm spot in my heart. My question is, now I see the mill rates. What are the average property values in the towns that are impacted?
They range from 50 to, in Newry, they go up as far as 500,000. And in Bethel, they can go as low as 40. Some are even, mobile homes and things along that line might not even reach the 50,000.
Would we be able to, for the work session, get the average for those
We'll do our
towns?
best to provide that for you. Thank you for your questions.
I've got one more for you.
Oh, all right.
I think Maine is really unique in its constitution says that each Maine town is responsible for educating their kids.
Absolutely. It's constitutional.
That's, so, how, this issue here, how does this work with, well, let me ask it this way. Should each town be able to determine that?
When you belong to a district, I think you all have to come together in an agreement about what's best for your district. I think that's why we formed the district. I think individual towns, we vote on one budget. We don't individualize them. So my perception would be that each town doesn't have that when you belong to a district. The district is one unit.
So that would supersede the responsibility of each town?
No.
To be responsible for-
No, we
Okay.
still, if you withdraw, you have a constitutional obligation to provide educations for the students in your town if you were to withdraw.
Super. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
See no further questions. Are there any other bill sponsors in the room who'd like to testify?
Morning, Senator Langley, Representative Cornfield, members of the Committee on Education and Cultural Affairs. My name is Representative John Madigan, serving the citizens of District 115, which includes Rumford, Roxbury, Sumner, Woodstock, and the Township of Milton. I'm here to testify in support of LD 1080, and I'm also a co-sponsor of this bill. I was approached by some of my constituents from the town of Woodstock, a member town of SAD 44. After this committee acted on LD 51 several weeks ago, an act regarding the withdrawal of a single municipality from a regional school unit. Their concern was over an amendment that was introduced at the public hearing that added a provision to petition the Education Commissioner to order binding mediation between the parties if voted by the majority of the withdrawal committee. Since they were not opposed to the original intent of LD 51, they were not present at the hearing to express concerns about the amendment. I believe they will be able to express their concerns later today when you open the public hearing on LD 1336, which further amends LD 51. And I thank you on behalf of my Woodstock constituents for opening up the second opportunity today, and I believe several of them are here. I have concerns myself over binding mediation. since it removes the voters in the entire district from the process. I know from experience, and that experience being a former town manager, I served on the consolidation committee for HARDSHIP 10. We spent a whole year trying to work that out between 3 SADs. We ended up with a 12-town district, and it's worked very well up until just this past year, when 5 of our towns voted to get out of the district. Okay. However, the final outcome, oh, wait a minute. I know from experience that consolidation agreements and withdrawal agreements can be very difficult to achieve. However, the final outcome should always remain with the voters, not in the hands of a single mediator. We have all gone to great lengths over the years to make sure that all of us has every opportunity to vote. I think that's very, very important. As outlined in Section 1 of LD 1080, SAD 44, as well as SAD 6, are the only 2 districts in the state that have been given special consideration apart from the standard school funding formula because of unique circumstances in both districts. Newry has a population of about 330 people, but has a state value of $481,600,000, whereas Woodstock has a population of 1,290, but has less than half of Newry's state value. Theirs is $205,650,000. When the school funding law changed in 2005, it was obvious that a special circumstance existed that required special consideration. Newry agreed. The same consideration was given to SAD 6 in 1997, when Fry Island wanted to succeed from the town of Standish. They agreed to remain in SAD 6 and pay their fair share, even though they have no year-round population and no students. Property value of each town in the state has to remain the basis for education funding. There really is no justification for arguing about per pupil cost when value alone reflects the ability to pay. That's the only thing that towns have to show some kind of fairness around, and several things that, funding formulas and revenue sharing and things. It's all based on value. If you decide at the work session to reject this LD, and you continue to favor the amendment to allow binding mediation for all district withdrawals, which is included in LD 51 and LD 1336, then I would ask you to consider adding the following amendment to LD 1336, which will continue the necessary special consideration already allowed to SAD 44 and SAD 6. I would suggest that you amend the bill in Section 1 by adding a new subparagraph at the end of subsection 4, paragraph A, to read as follows. This would be line 14. The mandatory mediation provisions of this subsection do not apply to those regional school units whose cost-sharing formulas remained in effect under Public Law 2005, Chapter 2, Section D-69. That's the law that has given consideration to SAD 44 and SAD 6. Continuation of the special allowance in these 2 school districts is the only way those districts will be able to educate their children at a reasonable cost. And I thank you for your consideration, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have. And I will make sure you get copies of my testimony. I apologize for not having them ready.
Appreciate that. Great to see you here, Representative Madigan. I think this is the first time you've been here.
It is, yes.
Welcome. Do you see this legislation as currently written restricting the citizens of Newry's ability to vote? You talked a lot about.
Yes, the LD 1080 does.
Yeah.
Again, you really have to weigh the special consideration here. This is quite a unique situation, and This was dealt with by the legislature apparently in 2005 when they recognized that there's a long-standing relationship with the entire district dating back probably to the 1960s, where they originally agreed on funding education strictly by value. And of course, the 2005 law changed all of that. And it said value or student population, whichever is less. Well, obviously, in this case, there's very few students coming from Newry, and that would be a huge shift in what had been agreed to many years before as part of the district funding formula. I do know that they, under what you've dealt with already in LD 51, I think for the most part, you provided a process. My understanding is this district has gone through the process. They have had a mediator. I've read the mediator's report. The mediator did say in his report that he was convinced that both sides did try to come up with a resolution, which, you know, when it went to the voters, it was voted down. Well, my way of dealing with that is that you go back to the drawing board and you keep on trying until you get something done that's acceptable to everybody. You don't just simply give it to a mediator. That really concerns me. And it concerns me from being a town manager where there are finding arbitration and mediation and union contracts that I've had to deal with over the years.
Representative, I'm going to ask you what may seem a very rhetorical question, but do you see this body, this committee here, sort of acting in the role of mediator at this very moment?
Absolutely, that's why we're here, isn't it? To make the tough decision.
And,
I'm a rookie, and I'm learning this very fast. It's very difficult decisions that we have to make.
and would you also agree that this is really not the best place to mediate those things between two towns?
It's not the way to mediate it between two towns, you're absolutely right, but it is our responsibility and yours primarily to come up with appropriate state law that deals with proper funding of education. I've been, the last 3 years, elected moderator in my RSU budget process. And out of the 12 towns in the district, 3 of them don't receive any aid education because their values are so high. And some of the towns receive an awful lot of aid education. And people ask me that every year. Somebody asks me that as the moderator, and I try to explain to them that the state's overall goal in funding education is to make sure that every kid, no matter where they live in this state, has a reasonable opportunity for an equal education. And that's why there's such a discrepancy in why some towns receive a lot of money and other towns receive very little or no education dollars.
President Sampson or President Kluger?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here, Representative.
You're welcome.
My question to you, just to clarify it in my own mind, you've mentioned the agreements that both SAD 6 and 44 made with the district. Is that essentially a contract, and when did they agree to that?
The SAD 6 agreement was done in 1997 when Fry Island had petitioned to become its own town and to get out of the town standards. Part of that agreement was that they would remain in SAD 6 and pay their fair share of education, even though, because it's in the middle of Lake Sebago, there's no access to it all winter. So they basically closed the town down, and they're probably just starting to get back there now for the summer. So it's mostly summer homes, it's mostly, you know, second homes, third homes, mostly out-of-state people that own that property. But still, property was within the town of Standish, and it was important for them to allow that secession to take place to make sure that they didn't lose the value of all the, all the homes and property in Again, The SAB 44 agreement was a result of the change in the education law in 2005. It was the legislature, from what I understand, that actually recognized there'd be a huge problem, and they were the ones that included SAB 44 in the same special law that had been put together previously for Fry Island and SAB 6.
President Cornfeld.
Could you be clear about the special consideration? What is this carve out exactly?
Basically, in the case of the SAD 44, the consideration doesn't mandate the law which allows for student population, whichever is less, because there's so few students over there, so they've allowed them to continue dealing with state value. So that the result of that, I think Representative Head already testified that it makes the mill rate in each of the towns in the district for education relatively equal. Okay, so what it does was it lowers for the other towns in the district, what I believe all of us in all of our towns, I think we have a cap of maybe 8.6 mils for the EPS share of education. What it does is it lowers that for Bethel and Woodstock and Greenwood to a lower figure so that they can achieve an equal mill rate, for all the towns in the district. Very unique situation.
Thank you. Thank you, Representative Donovan. I don't see any further questions. Thank you for your testimony today.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you. Any other co-sponsors would like to testify in support of this bill?